Welcome to YouX, the global podcast at the intersection of research, design, and development. Sit back and listen as your hosts explore the ever-evolving world of user experience. And now, Chris Covell and Mustafa Ahmed.
So welcome everyone to the UX podcast. Mustafa, how's it going today?
Good, Chris. How are you doing?
Doing just fine. Today, we have a special guest with us. Hi, Joe. How's it going?
Hi. Not bad.
Maybe you want to go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell the folks a little bit about kind of what you do, what you're up to right now, and how you got interested and excited about product design and UX and these kinds of topics.
Cool. Yeah. So I'm a Londoner. I was brought up in the London suburbs, and I started working for different tech startups in London back in 2009, 2010. And since then, I moved from mobile development originally. I got into iOS and Android development in the early days. And since then, have moved from mobile development into more like mobile mindset and mobile design. And then joined a company called Dibizzle, which is a B2C marketplace in Dubai, a bit like Craigslist, but for the Dubai market. And spent a lot of time transforming that business into a mobile first business through mobile mindset and incubation. Then after that, I worked for a company called Talabat, which do B2C food ordering and delivery software. So my focus there was really more on creating a delightful experience for customers after they order. So a lot of that was figuring out how to measure in an outcome-driven way the experience that customers have at that company. And then more recently, my latest role is to create a product-led org at ETAP, which is a B2B2C, mostly SAS driven company.
That's great. Thanks for that. And I think this topic of becoming product-led is something we're going to kind of get into in a little bit. Definitely something that I think Mustafa and I find quite interesting. Some of the last conversations that we've been having here on the podcast have been about restructuring organizations to make it more experimental and have them embrace design, have them embrace product a little bit more. So really excited to kind of get into those topics. But how long? So this is actually one thing that I think the three of us have in common, which is the Dubai similarity. So how long have you been in the Middle East?
Yeah, I moved to Dubai in 2014, so that'll be 9 years now. I briefly moved to Berlin. Didn't really work out, and I came back to Dubai.
It was a cold that it was too cold up there, huh?
It's pretty cold in Berlin, yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah. All right. Before we kind of jump into your PowerPoint, because there's a PowerPoint that we'll actually link in the show notes, which was how I became aware of you. That it was a presentation that's called Becoming Product Led, which we'll kind of march through here in a second. But maybe we want to begin with talking a little bit about the distinction you make between being sales led and then also being product led, and why being sales led is bad.
I would say being exclusively sales led is bad. I'm a strong believer that you can't really have a pure product led motion if you have a complex product, right? You have to have a product led motion with a marketing led motion and a sales led motion. If you think about it, you have different perspectives. You have your internal perspectives, where you think like, okay, what's the product that we have that we are serving to our customers, and how are we going to help customers see what we believe is most valuable for them, and how do we help them hear about how do we sell to them the value of that product? And so each of these is your product-led motion, which is the feel, like the product itself, the marketing-led motion, which is how you communicate that value through, your marketing site, partially your demos, and then your sales-led motion is how you hear about it. So all of these different perspectives come into play. A product-led motion doesn't mean that you're exclusively a product-led company. It just means that you're predominantly product-led, with a catalyst of marketing-led and sales-led alongside it.
Yeah. Just to follow up on that, though, would you say, kind of based on your analysis, if you were looking out at the market right now, just kind of holistically, are many companies product-led, or are many companies sales-led? Would you say is the vast majority of companies sales-led? And if so, what do you think is preventing from keeping them to be sales-led versus transforming, I guess you can say?
Yeah. So one of the biggest mistakes that gets made over time, if you're not actually sure which direction you're going to go with your product, is as you get requests coming in from your customers through your sales team, to close a deal, you end up just building what your customer asks for. And so I think, you're right. Like most companies are very sales led because their customers basically tell them they won't buy the product unless they build what they tell their sales team. So I'd say that's extremely sales led. I think the other reason is usually the people who bring in money for the company are your sales team, as well as most businesses have some sort of physical asset alongside their software being sold. I mean, even in the software world, in the B2B world, it can be very heavily sales led. Yeah.
And Joe, I'm just wondering that is this behavior that we're seeing that, what the customer says, let's run out and build. Is this something that you think is only isolated to the B2B kind of, type of organization, or is this something you're seeing across the board with companies that serve exclusively B2C?
I think with B2C, it was never called product led, because with B2C, you're always building a software that by intrinsically should be self-serve, because you can't scale otherwise. Like you're never going to have a B2C software and do everything manually if you want to be making money from it. So I think because of the number of users you have, you have to find ways to be product led in the B2C world, and in the B2B world, because products usually are more complex. They start off simulating what the product should be doing with manual labor, which is what makes it harder to scale. So
one of the other concepts that I kind of want to introduce here before we get into your deck is, also you talk about this in the deck a little bit, which is product market fit. If you can maybe just talk about how you see product market fit, because that's kind of a general concept, but how to actually make it more tangible. Can you maybe make it a little bit more tangible?
Yeah. Okay. So the concept of product market fit is that you have something that a customer needs, and you have your product, right? Which has the value. And so between what the market needs and between your product, that's your fit. And so that's the easiest way I would describe product market fit, is that you have what you'd call an underserved need, and the product you have itself, the product that you have, which provides value to the customer to serve that need. And if you get that fit right, then you can sell it and make money, and that's your PMF.
Yeah. So it becomes, I think that's a great description. So thanks for that. It becomes, I think, a little bit sometimes difficult looking at this from the product market fit from a research point of view, which is if you look out at your market, let's say your market's quite large, millions of people, how to actually spot and locate and identify specific needs and how to understand the magnitude can get a little bit hairy, I think, sometimes, right?
Yeah, definitely. If there was a silver bullet for identifying an addressable market that hasn't already been addressed, then everyone would be continuously innovating.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's I wish there was a silver bullet. I think a lot of the time it just comes down to realizing that there's some pain that somebody has that you can alleviate.
Yeah, and we'll get to that because I think that that's actually one of your tips is actually looking at pain and so yeah, it's great that you kind of talk about that in your deck. So without further ado, I think maybe we can jump in to the first tip in that deck, which is labeled becoming product led. So maybe before we get to the first tip, which I have here is find pain in the day-to-day jobs that your product does. Maybe that actually talking about this will address the point that I made before about actually how do you find need, right? But what was the impetus of you wanting to create this deck? Like, did you feel like something was speaking of needs, did you feel like there was a latent need out there that people weren't understanding how to become product led? Like what sparked you to want to work on this project?
Yeah, I've seen companies trying to be empowering to the people in their companies, or trying to lead with good strategy and just completely failing because they missed the point. Mm-hmm. I've seen like over the last 10 years, I've seen so many problems with different orgs. I've been through loads of.
I think your cat wants us to introduce him or her.
Yeah, he keeps coming back. Yeah.
What's his name?
Keto.
Okay.
Like not like the keto diet. Like Kit Kat is where it came from. Actually, the chocolate bar.
Oh right.
And then somehow it evolved into keto, but keto. Keto cat.
And yeah, he wanted. It seems like he wanted to be involved. So anyway, okay, yeah. But you were saying about what was actually causing you to want to, to talk about these ideas.
Yeah. So I've been like over the last 10 years of my career, I've been through lots of different change management cycles and different organizations. I've seen things done really wrong or done well, and I took all of those learnings and I wanted to agnostically apply it to. Or create some rules from it that I know works. And things that pretty much any organization can apply, even if you're a small B2B startup, or even if you're a large B2C startup. I think all of these rules are super valuable for each of them. They're more like tips rather than rules. You don't have to follow them all, but
yeah. Kind of. I looked at them almost as like heuristics. But cool. Okay. So the first one, find pain in the day-to-day jobs that your product does. So maybe real quick, maybe, 1 or 2 minutes we'll spend with you kind of summarizing, each of these 8 tips. And then we'll kind of discuss a little bit more, kind of, unpack each one of them via question and answer. So.
Cool. Yeah. So the way I formed it was for each of the tips, it's more like a timeline. That's what I originally started with, and I think in the deck, that's how I visualize it as well. I originally in the deck actually had like day 1, and then like day 180. Like after 6 months, if you follow this, this is where you'll be. But it's not true, right? Like every org has different sizes, different complications. So I removed that part because it could take any period of time. But as I've gone through this, it's usually taken me 6 to 9 months to really see changes in an organization and change an org, like flip it on its head, right? And so that's where it really formed from. And the first tip, which was finding pain in day-to-day jobs that your product does, is really the most important one. A lot of organizations will try and skip that step. And then they will go down a path which actually isn't valuable or bringing value to their customers or saving them time internally. So I think so that's the first tip. And And then I talk about how you would focus your organization to take action straight away, which is much harder in larger orgs, but with the right principles, it can become much easier. Then I talk a little bit about product discovery, right? I'd say it's like basic rules, which many people don't follow. So that's the third tip, and then.
Sure. Yeah. I think maybe moving back for the first two tips. So, you talked about how the first one especially is the most important. And I think, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I read it was that it heavily involves discovery work, and discovery work from a UX researcher. I kind of, my ears perk up because I feel like that's something that research is quite well suited to perform. So I also wanted to get into what you also mean by, jobs to be done framework, and how that kind of differs from, or maybe you see it as the same way or the same method as, or the same, looking for the same outcome as, say, like a journey map. Would you see that, like the jobs to be done framework and journey mapping as being very similar? Because what I almost feel like what you're trying to do, especially when you look at the deck, is you walk through the different steps that a customer has to take in relation to your product, and I guess assess those I guess steps, and you, like you said, look for pain, look for some sort of problem that arises. So
yeah. So when you're looking at pain in your day-to-day jobs or your customers' day-to-day jobs, you're always immediately looking at exactly what they're trying to get done. Whereas if you do like journey mapping, you're not necessarily looking at a single job that you want to get done, right? So with this, it makes it so that you're already honing down on what is valuable for your end user or for your internal user. So that's the main goal with at least with the way I use jobs to be done, or in this case, job step mapping is what I like to refer to or use the most. And you mentioned outcomes. I'm a big fan of Tony Ulwick's perspective, and the kind of outcome-driven innovation and approach.
Yeah, no. So, I mean, from my experience using a jobs to be done framework, I see the value in that as well, as opposed to just purely journey mapping, which usually we kind of reserve for more of current state mapping. And in the case of, if you're trying to be an organization that is frequently delivering, value and features out the door, then you're obviously going to be adopting more of an agile methodology. And jobs to be done, from my experience, seems like a great way to kind of use that to almost derive your user stories as well, right? In order to get those your product delivery out on a much quicker pace. So I just kind of find that interesting that you're applying that from the get-go, as opposed to what I've seen more traditional organizations do, try to apply that more from senior management is happy with this. Now, how do we turn this into functional requirements for delivery teams?
Right. Yeah. I like it. We've probably all heard of the phrase HIPPO, highest paid person's opinion. But yeah, you never want to start from, say never, we all do, but you shouldn't start from the highest paid person's opinion. You should look at the data that you have. You should look at the pain that your customers are facing, the pain that you're facing internally, things that waste your time, things that waste your money ultimately, or waste your customers' time or money. And that will nearly always result in a much better way to decide on what you're going to prioritize in building. I think also you mentioned about, you said creating user stories through this. I would say it's one step before that. The goal in my mind for job step mapping, and when you're finding that pain, is to initially find opportunities, which are much closer to the outcomes that you want to achieve. I think once you've found the right opportunity after doing that mapping, it'll be like a single step within that job as you write it out. You'll realize that there are some very quick wins, low-hanging fruits that will save you loads and loads of time, but they won't necessarily be on a solution level. So it might not have user stories at that point, right?
Right. And how do you navigate through the I guess the surprise that tends to come about every now and then when you do this kind of activity, where in order to fulfill or improve on this or eradicate this pain point that the customer is facing, we need to internally change our processes. So the actual feature that does go out, the effort to actually delivering that feature for the customer is far less than the effort that goes into reworking or process re-engineering the internal operations. So I've always kind of found that as a hard conversation to have, because most people think that, oh, okay, cool, it's a quick little widget, right? We're just going to make that, it's going to solve this user's problem. But in reality, if you're working in a much more legacy kind of organization, there's a lot more that happens behind the scenes that you have to take care of, because, well, there's so much more that needs to be fixed.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of other pieces that can cause bloat as well. I think a lot of it comes down to how, like, helping all the stakeholders in the organization understand the why, right? Like, why is it that we even want to change the landing page or something like this, right? Like, wherever the solution is, you would make that why super clear to all of your stakeholders, and then you need to make it clear to all of your stakeholders, all the people involved in the project. Like, not just the why, but if we had like one day, what would be that one pain point that we would want to solve? And then if that's clear to everybody at the start, they won't build big bloated solutions where they try and make like super highly scalable, like overly architected solutions from day one, or the designer spends a week designing something with bells and whistles that aren't needed, right? Because they'll know exactly what the pain point is they're trying to solve. It's already been distilled down to the not, I wouldn't say minimum viable product, but you could say minimum lovable product. It doesn't always take the form of a minimum lovable product, but it's definitely a food for thought. When even if you're modifying a legacy product, should you treat it as an MLP, or should you just treat it as though it's an extra arm or a leg to that legacy product? And I think everything should be treated as small experiments or small MLPs, and that way you learn faster as well.
Yeah, no, that's a really great way of looking at it. And I think we want to go ahead also and start touching on trying to transform the mindset in companies to be more experimental, because it's something that, especially in larger organizations, I've worked for quite a few larger organizations, Fortune 50 companies in my career. And when you walk into these types of places and environments, trying to be more data driven, trying to challenge assumptions and be experimental has been quite difficult. So we can definitely get maybe there towards the end, talk about why you think that is and how to change hearts and minds to be more product driven or design driven. But focusing the conversation now on OKRs. So this was actually something that has come up between Mustafa and I had in past episodes. So maybe you want to go ahead and define how you look at OKRs. And I'm also really interested in this idea of top down and bottom up and how they meet at the middle.
So for me, maybe I'll just start explaining what OKRs are, just for those who haven't heard of it before. So your objective in an OKR, you've got objective and then key result. And your objective is where you want to get to, and your key result is how you measure the progress towards that objective. So it should be something that you can tangibly measure. And there should always be like an X and a Y value on your key result. Your objective should be exciting. And And on the point of being able to apply OKRs at the top of your org and all the way at the bottom of your org, what's really important is that everyone in your org, not individually, but within their respective teams or squads or tribes, should have trickle down OKRs. And what I mean by trickle down is that not that it's set by the hippo and everyone follows it, but actually it has buy-in from the bottom of the org, if you like, or in the squads, even in your customer support team, and that is focused on from a bottom up perspective, matching what you do ultimately want to achieve at the top of the org as well. So that way, everybody in the org is actually focusing on the same OKRs, but they're focusing on a slightly different piece of those OKRs. And I think one thing that can be really hard with OKRs is that a lot of the time it isn't kept simple and it isn't measurable. So an OKR, like there's this concept of leading indicators and lagging indicators, right? And a leading indicator is something you can tangibly measure today, like the number of customers who checked out. That's something you can tangibly measure today, right? And then your lagging indicator may actually be like revenue gained, because to calculate revenue, you then have to get money in the bank, and it takes that's more of a lagging indicator. So potentially at the top of the org, you're saying, okay, we want to gain revenue. But if you really want to get people motivated and empowered, you say, how do we split that down? Your leading indicator might be, okay, we're going to hit 50 sales of this one item. That's not necessarily money in the bank. That's your behavioral tracking, right? You're saying 50 times different unique customers have checked out here. And so this is an example of an OKR that's trickled down, right? And that way it's measurable. It's simple enough for everybody to understand. And it will always relate back up to, one of your org OKRs, if it's revenue based in this example, right? So I think that's one of the main things, is that everyone should have some responsibility in the org to help push those OKRs, and they should be empowered to do so as well.
No, that's great. That's really helpful. I think that definitely, I don't know if you see a major difference between OKRs and KPIs. I mean, I think that they kind of have. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. There's a family resemblance, but obviously there are distinguishing features.
Yeah. So OKRs are not KPIs, right? Like that's one mistake that so many orgs make, is that what is a KPI? Like, what does it mean? Key performance indicator. So it's measuring performance. You can measure performance on a team level, but really, when you are looking at the performance of individuals, that's what you should be looking at, right? Like, are these individuals contributing towards the overall picture in a good way? And so your KPIs should not actually be measured in the same way or used in the same way as OKRs. What I would do is, or what I like to do is, I like to keep KPIs on a personal level. So it's something. Sorry, not on a personal level, but on an individual level. So it's something where an individual is making their sales target, for example, right? But that individual also needs to look at the happiness of the customer, for example. These are, for me, performance indicators of that individual. And I'd keep that separate. I'd keep that more like it's a horizontal measurement, whereas your OKRs are vertical measurements. And one mistake which gets made is that KPIs often conflict with OKRs. Like, one example of that is, let me think. So you set a pure sales target in the remuneration of one of your sales team members, right? But that sales team member in their KPI does not have an OKR for customer satisfaction. So they are not motivated at all to actually make sure that the customer knows how to use the product before handing it off to like your onboarding team, or before the customer actually like installs the product and starts using it. So if in your OKRs customer happiness exists, then you're basically screwing over that OKR by not having it in your KPIs. And so I see this conflict quite a lot. And the simplest way to resolve that is to just make sure that it's part of the performance indicators, right? Customer happiness and revenue, or retention, is built into these KPIs. So that's for me the difference between a KPI and an OKR is that KPIs, they're done by a team, and everyone has their part to play in making those OKRs happen. But key performance indicators are something you can go back to an individual with and say, well, why didn't you hit those targets? What can you do better? And that's the biggest difference in the playbook I would go with.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I almost look at, based on your description and based on like the definitions between the two different, measurement systems, that OKRs are almost more strategic. And, I also like how the image that you use, or the words that you were using, as vertical instead of horizontal. Because like when you're thinking of it vertically, it almost by definition means that there's buy-in from, across the board, which is really nice. And I think helps get things moving and helps make the work happen, and just makes things more efficient. But there is something too that I sometimes struggle with, especially when, we're talking about, doing UX, doing design, building products. To some degree, that means innovating, even if you're using a legacy, or, if you're starting with a legacy product and you're, augmenting it and building features into it or taking features out. I mean, to me, this is all a experimental, innovative process. You're kind of learning and experimenting and changing as you move through, through the product lifecycle. And whether you're using, design thinking, whether you're using Double Diamond, I know in your talk you bring up Double Diamond. But one of the things that in my career I've always had trouble with is trying to predict the future. And in a sense of with an OKR or even KPIs, to make things tangibly measurable when you don't really know what you're building yet, right? Where the idea of design thinking and empathizing, or Double Diamond, going wide, and discovery is that you're trying to learn things that, you don't know what you don't know. And to make a KPI or to make an OKR before that process even happens, it becomes quite difficult to try to see it in the future and make something measurable when you don't even know what you're going to be changing or what you're going to be building before you do it. So is there anything that you can say to help in those situations? I'll give you an example. I went to a product owner one time building out this whole kind of research program following design thinking principles. And it was trying to redesign a personal loan experience or journey. And a lot of the work that we were doing was this discovery work, trying to understand personas, trying to understand the current state using journey maps, to see where we want to become, what we tangibly want to change, to go back to your first point, find that pain and then try to solution for it. And before we even were able to get the budget to do this project, he wanted us to make a, he wanted to understand the return on investment. And it was very difficult for me to know what that return on investment metric would be before we even did the discovery work.
There are ways to always test demand, and demand testing can happen right at the top of funnel if you want. It's like, okay, why don't we try add a page to pitch the job that we're trying to do for the customer here, or see if this will bring value for the customer, and see how much interest is gauged through that. And that will give you a much better perspective on your projections more likely to be true if you're able to do that. So there are things like that which you can do. And you can do fake door testing. You can actually make a very small prototype. You can actually speak with customers, maybe send out a survey, find out the demand. There's so many different things you can do to test the water on your current user base, to understand and project what the likely demand will be and what the likely return on that development will be. So I'd say it just comes down to small small validation exercises before you jump in and assign massive budgets to things. Yeah, that's the simplest way I can put it. But to be honest, much of the time, like even in orgs that say they're product led, they will not do that, right? They will just jump in and do small experiments from day one. That's also not bad either. But on the flip side, I've seen orgs who, they go and build massive warships, and the warships sink because they they don't have product market fit at all. They didn't actually test the market beforehand. So it really is a case of like, if you're confident that the time you're going to spend is going to yield results either through immediate and quick learning or through immediate and quick revenue, then do that first, basically.
Yeah. I mean, I think speaking of product market fit, it's sometimes, you walk into an organization that isn't design led or product led. There's a disconnect between your methods, the methods of a product led person or design led person, and what they're looking for and how they typically, operate. And there's a clash, and it becomes tough to even know how to move forward. So that's another, I think, partly what this framework is trying to do is, and probably towards the end, we'll get to this too. I think some of the later tips really speak to organizational transformation. So,
yeah, for sure. Like none of these, you couldn't get a company to be product led unless they say they want to be product led, right?
Yeah. Right.
If there's no buy-in, if you're the only one who's preaching, then you're probably going to fail.
You're going nowhere. Yeah.
Exactly. So you do need buy-in from the leadership to make this happen. Not just buy-in as well; they have to advocate for it. So you have to be good at communicating the why. Like why do we need to be product led? How is it going to help our org? How can it help us move faster than our competitors? Is usually the easiest way to sell it. But yeah. Cool.
Okay. Maybe we want to move on to number, I guess 3 and 4. So tip number, I'll let you introduce it.
Yeah. So tip number 3 is briefly what we've been talking about, which is, if you want to move fast as an org, you have to get alignment from your stakeholders. And the best way to do that is to make sure you're not taking much time on the roadmap. Right? You're doing small iterations. You're doing pieces of discovery, right? Not giant discovery projects which take months. You're doing continuous small discovery, which allows you to ship value or ship experiments extremely fast. And I think tip number 3 is to discover and ship value frequently, which is a lot of the time skipped, right? Bigger orgs tends to forget about that for some reason. Maybe middle management gets added, and then people have to turn everything into projects, and everything has to be this 1 month, 2 month block on a roadmap. So then they spend way too long doing research and not actually like failing fast, right? So that's what this tip's really about. So there's this you can see it in the slide deck, but there's an image which I can't even remember where I got it from. Maybe someone can tell me. But it's an image of like how not to ship a solution. Instead of building the solution piece by piece because you planned it out to take like 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 1 year, you should build it in smaller stages where you're focusing on a piece of the value at a time, so that you can learn from it faster, right? So you can actually ship value faster and you can learn from it along the way. So you end up with a much better product at the end.
Yeah, for
Sorry,
those
Tanya.
for those of the audience members who aren't looking at the deck, it's basically I think this is what you're talking about, where it goes from a skateboard to like a scooter,
Exactly,
and then ultimately finishes off in a race car. And yeah, and I think like the moral of the story there is don't make assumptions, and as you're going through the process, you're learning and you're being experimental, and things are changing on the fly based on the data that's coming in. And you're kind of tweaking the product to achieve that product market fit as you're going through the process, instead of starting from ground zero, saying we're going to get to a worship and just trying to build a worship without actually iterating and testing all the way through.
100%. If you build something really big, there's going to be a lot of assumptions along the way. I like that word, assumptions. And what it comes down to really is risk. And so there's one book which probably many people have heard of, which is inspired by Marty Kagan, which has these 4 risk types. One's the value risk, which is whether customers will actually buy it or use it or choose to use it. You've got your usability risk, so can users figure out how to use it? Your feasibility risk, whether engineers can build the products at all. And then your business viability risk, which is whether the solution will work for like other parts of the business as well. And so if you create big projects, either it's going to take you a really long time to plan that out and get a kind of thumbs up that, yeah, this risk is low, even, which may take negotiation and may not actually be true, by the way. So, which is like may not be worth it in the end, right? So the risk is reduced a bit, but not fully. And that takes time, right? Or you can ship in much smaller pieces, which reduces the risk massively, because you're not blocking out like a whole load of roadmap time doing this experiment. So there's always risk, right? And everything you build, there could be a competitor that comes around next week or next month, which knocks out your product from product market fit simply because they have a better product, and it can happen, right? They do the job better than you. So the smaller you can experiment and test the viability, feasibility, usability, and value of your product, the better you'll be placed in 3-6 months.
I almost look at it sometimes, and not to get too far down this rabbit hole, but the analogy I use is natural selection in ecosystems, right? Where you have certain new organisms coming into the ecosystems, and the ones that survive, and the ones that don't fail. And there's reasons why the ecosystem selects certain organisms, right? It's that fit that we're talking about.
Right. How fast can you reproduce and breed out bad products, bad features? That's
exactly right. So it's interesting, because I also feel like what you're talking about, discovery, it's very much empirical. It's very much wanting to test things. It's wanting to test assumptions. It's wanting to collect data and bring in data, make sense of it, and base decisions on that data, right? To me, that requires like a very strong research bent to product design. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. Like one of the biggest mistakes that I see made all the time when products are designed is that a whole design phase will happen, and it will happen independently of product, of engineering, and of customers, more importantly. And so when those situations happen, you're pretty much 80-90% of the time going to fail. Like it's not, the product is going to have to be iterated on considerably. And so I've seen many orgs who just make that mistake.
Do you think that it's arrogance, or like how is, because it seems obviously when you get the logic of the framework in your mind, it seems so intuitive, or at least for a lot of people who I talk to who buy into this kind of methodology, it feels very intuitive, right? Like, again, going back to the natural selection analogy, it's like you have to understand your ecosystem and what the demand is before you can actually feel confident that whatever you put into that ecosystem will actually work. But you're right. I mean, so many times people don't see it that way. So many times, so many organizations, don't come at it from that angle. I'm just curious if you have a theory as to why it usually gets overlooked.
Yeah, I think there's a few factors to it. So imagine you have a designer whose job, he's been like put into this silo, right? Of like, here's a problem that we have. Here's the high level flow that we expect, go and design it, right? They get put into this little silo where their job is to just make an amazing design. So at that point, they've already kind of been given the instructions. And what that does is it discourages that designer or design task force from going and speaking to customers, actually like reverse engineering it back to the problems, back to the opportunities that are being solved for. So that's the first mistake that I see made. And then the other thing to remember is that when you're passing over tasks like this, even if you are thinking, oh, well, they'll go and research it, or even if you give them instructions to research it, not everybody is extroverted enough to make that part of their job. So it's better to have, right? It's just a common thing that you see. It's better to have a variety of different people from different backgrounds who are like they're extroverted in certain ways or introverted in certain ways, because they will see it from different perspectives. They will research it in different ways, or they will look at different methodologies to use to make sure that we are making the right decision.
So yeah, it's a great point. I mean, I think you're right about the personality traits. I would also say too, is just like nobody can do everything, right? Like, so some people have more of a focus or more of a talent for the design side of things, more of a people, or more like some people have more of a talent or traits for like being people. And then there's also like people like us, Mustafa and I, like we really enjoy doing the research part of things, but that comes from a background in understanding how to like make sense of data and create knowledge, which is not something that I think everybody has on the team. That's a pretty specialized skill to be able to design out a research study or to, make a survey and make sure that 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 data that you're collecting is going to the right place. So it makes so whoever understands that data, whoever gets that, consumes it, can make a decision about a business decision or a product decision, right? So it's like being able to almost, in a sense, hire or bring on the right people to create that pirate ship, right? And everyone kind of has their role, and it comes together with a beautiful, well-designed, well thought-through solution.
Right, for sure. I think that's exactly what it is. If you have someone, like you said it yourself, research, right? Research as a term is quite wide, because you could have researchers who are focused more on surveillance. They're focused more on qualitative insight, deriving insights from qualitative data, whereas you have other researchers who are more, maybe they're actually just writing SQL like half the day. You could be, right? Depends on how you define the role. So you could have someone who's really, really focused on like quantifying data into dashboards for the boards to look at, right? Like two completely different roles under the same umbrella. And I think what it comes down to is if you empower your product teams to self-serve analytics and do research themselves, make sure they understand like what discovery methodologies there are available. Actually, Talabat did something really cool. They posted it on LinkedIn maybe like a year ago or something. They created like cards, like a deck of cards, which have all these different interview techniques, I think it was. And I think stuff like that is really powerful, right? Like giving like helping your org understand good ways to speak with customers, good ways to derive qualitative or even quantitative insights, right? And then having that focus as well. Like if you make sure that your org are asking the right questions, because if they don't have clear OKRs, they're just going to be like, okay, how do we make a good experience for a user? But like, that's a bit wide, right? Like, there's many things you can make as a good experience, but you should really be focusing on the things that matter the most for your customers. And it's very easy to bloat solutions if you don't have that focus.
Well, that's true. Yeah, it's like experience can mean a lot of things, and good means a lot of things, right? So like, kind of getting that more focused can be, as we all know, can be a challenge. But I think that's where research really comes in to help everybody see that focus and not and settle the disputes that can flare up pretty quickly with, when it comes to, okay, it's your opinion, my opinion. What do I think that the users want? What do I think who the users are? These questions. Okay, and from my perspective, I'm just like, all right, these are empirical questions. They can be settled with data. Let's just go out and find the answers, and then we can start being creative.
100%. So that's actually my fourth tip in my deck, is that.
Okay. Perfect.
With that, insights will help you agree on changes, and the way to derive insights is to find out what the painful jobs are, and you can find those painful jobs through surveying, through deep diving into quantitative data. Right, you can see what's taking the most time of look at your tracking behaviors, what's taking the most time, and I think jumping between, like I call it like a quant-qual loop, where you look at some quantitative data, it allows you to dive into a large segment of users who are having an experience which is not quite right. Then you go and do some qualitative research to find out why that's happening. And then once you've done that, you can dive back and say, okay, what's my addressable audience of this problem, this pain that I'm solving for? And that way you can not just find those painful jobs, but you get insights from it, right? You're like, people were having a painful time with this job because of this particular step in the job, right? And I think from there as well, you then discover opportunities. If you know where that pain's coming from, you can say, okay, now I know it's taking them six days to close this, like get this customer to pay because of this one thing that this one person in the company ends up doing with the customer. Okay, so how do we minimize the time it takes to solve that? And that for me is an opportunity. Any time you can save for customers, or any if you look at your customer satisfaction surveys, or the number of like dislikes on like depending on how you survey your customers, right? On particular flows, you can actually understand. You can say, okay, how do we can see where this pain point's coming from now because we spoke with customers, we got that insight. Now let's go and solve for that. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And your point about mixed methods, I think, is a good one. And again, can get overlooked at times, at least in my experience, because I think a lot of times, people don't have the strongest background in, data collecting methodologies. But to your point, I've experienced in the past when you combine either with data science plus, say, interviews, or if you actually do it more, you take the data science and the telemetry data out, and you actually do, like, let's say, a survey into interviews back to a survey or something like that, where you're going wide and then you're going narrow, and you're trying to understand the behavior and you're trying to understand the mindset of the customers, but then, using bigger data, using quantitative to really validate and be confident about those interviews. If you jump back and forth and you kind of weave those insights together and have a nice way of telling the story, it really is hard to argue with. And when you show it to people, even without backgrounds in say data or research methodologies, this kind of thing, and you walk them through it, it's a real amazing opportunity for everybody to come together and agree on this is the North Star. Here's how we should be. Here's what we should be at least focused on. But having that mixed methodology, I think, is something that's super important, because it allows me as a researcher, or everybody on the team, to really come together about feeling really confident about what we're working on, instead of just guessing.
That's exactly what it is. It's like you have to come to an agreement. That's really what it is about. You find an insight, and then you agree that you want to action that insight with your stakeholders, with even the developers or the designer, right? Whoever is working in that scope. If everyone's agreed that the experiment has potential to either fail or succeed, or learn from, then what it really comes down to really get that buy-in is, can we lower, if the confidence is high already, then we're fine. But if the confidence isn't high yet, how do we lower that risk? A lot of it at the end of the day just comes down to shipping smaller and learning faster. Once you've even if you have that data, you're like, okay, do it. Well, how do we build it? You just have to continuously learn and survey.
So yeah, maybe you can get into the details a little bit about what you mean by pivoting org structures around the customer, because I think that this is a really interesting one, again, especially when it comes to bigger organizations. I mean, I'd be curious for you what you would think about, is this more of a methodology or a framework or a directive that you would want, or that you see, startups being the best kind of environment for this? Or do you see this kind of scaling up even to larger enterprise?
Yeah, 100% it can scale up. I think one of the mistakes that we've all seen in the past, or maybe we're in that situation right now, is that when you build an org structure, you will bucket your teams based upon their speciality or specialization, and that's actually fine to bucket teams based on specialization, but only on I would say, horizontal level. What you should try and aim to do is to make it so that your product managers are speaking with your marketing representatives, they're speaking with your sales team, they're speaking with your finance team. And if you create these little bucketed silos of specialist teams, you completely block that off from happening. So these old departmental, I know I said we wouldn't use the word old, these incorrect departmental org structures, I wouldn't say it's incorrect, but yeah, these org structures that don't give you that pathway to creating an outcome-based org are what stop some of these bigger orgs from innovating a lot of the times, because they're not encouraging intrinsically, they're not encouraging their product team to speak with their marketing team, to even speak with engineers sometimes, right? They'll call their engineers the IT team or something. It's like what's the phrase I heard the other day that made me cringe a little bit? It was like the tech department or something. I'm like, man, come on. Yeah, they separated it from their product department. I'm like, okay. The tech department's just some engineers that are completely separated from marketing, from product. Anyway, but yeah, you have you have these very old-fashioned ways of looking at these departmental.
I mean, what I hear you, and it's really refreshing to hear too, because it's something that I tend to think the way I think as well, which is like trying to take a step back and look at consistency and trying to see how these different buckets or these different categories within the organization, how they kind of flow together and how to kind of blur the lines a little bit. And yeah, it's something that for me, at least, I know I get frustrated with it, and it seems like you're also getting frustrated with it. So but the problem is that it seems like it's much more common, to go back to the question about sales led versus design led or product led. I mean, when we look at organizations now, it seems like a lot of times that, people I've talked to, places I've worked, it seems like this is the status quo. Maybe not for startups. Startups might be a whole different world, but especially for established organizations, this is the way, this is the modus operandi, right? And it just seems like I agree with you. It seems like, well, why does it have to be this way? Why can't we, start trying to break down these borders a little bit? And it just becomes very difficult.
For sure. I think there's talkers in the world and there's doers in the world. And if you have founders who are mostly talkers, they will drift towards that. They'll drift towards a sales, like a sales-led perspective, or a marketing/sales-led perspective a lot of the time. So that's probably why you see that quite often. I think the bit that will help organizations win, and it's what we're seeing, right, with the most successful organizations, is the willingness to hand over the keys to other roles. Not all the keys, just the keys to marketing. You give it to a head of marketing. The keys for deciding what gets built, you give that to your head of product. And if you're willing to do that as a founder, you'll be much more likely to focus on outcomes rather than what your next favorite pet project is. And I think it's okay to have pet projects, of course, but it has to be justified with data. And that you need to give the keys to someone to allow you to go down that path. So it's I think that's like the first thing.
Relinquishing control is a big thing for sure. And I mean, another kind of layer to be added onto this too is that there's a book by the Apple designer called Build by Tony Fadell. I think his name was
Tony Fadell.
Tony Fadell. Yeah. Who's it's a great book. I highly recommend it. But he talks about leadership, and he segments it into babysitter leaders, or babysitter CEOs, and parent leaders and parent CEOs. Parent CEOs and leaders want to see their kids, want to see their company grow, whereas babysitter CEOs just are happy with just making sure that they just put out fires and just make sure that the ship is heading in the same direction that it's always been headed. And there's just a difference in maybe personality and in ability to take risks, these kinds of traits.
It's also I think it also comes down to, if you have built the foundations of a product that has hit or nearly hit product market fit, not only babysitting it towards that direction, but you've programmed your mind to have certain expectations of how we should be building the product or how we should be steering the ship. And when someone comes in from a completely different perspective and they're kind of covering your blind spots, if you're not willing to actually absorb what those people are saying, then you will crash the ship. And so I think it's really, really important that relinquishing that control is a really important factor to success.
I mean, I think fear drives a lot of people to why change what's, if it's not broke, let's not change it. Because if I'm the person who is going to let's say start breaking down these borders or trying something new or being more experimental, and we fall on our face, then I'm the person who gets blamed, and why, and I don't want that. So it's I think it's a risk tolerance kind of question as well. But okay, great. How about we now kind of close out the last few tips from your deck? Sure. I think tip 6, 7, and 8, and then we can kind of end off on some more general questions.
Sure. So I'll kind of segue from tip 5. So tip 5 is to pivot your org structure around the customer. That means getting rid of this old departmental style org structure for focus and focusing on an outcome-based org structure. And what that means is separating your org into outcome-based, what I call tribes. It comes from the Spotify model. Yeah. And the idea of a tribe is that you're focusing on a vision and mission for that tribe, with clear-cut OKRs for that tribe as well, right? You would have had enough insights by this point to know exactly what that tribe should be focusing on, a strong enough strategy to set that tone. And then what you do is you take your engineers, your marketing team, your sales, your even finance or account managers, whoever it is, and you put them in these respective tribes based upon what is required to get the outcome that you need, as opposed to separating them by department just because they have that specialization, right? And that way your organization becomes a lot more fluid, and it allows you to remove all those unneeded kind of political structures or the hippo. It kind of forces, if your founders are willing to take that jump, that leap, it will force them to hand over the keys, because they're essentially handing over these keys to these tribe leaders or leaders of respective squads within those tribes. So I think that, pivoting to that outcome-based org structure is super important. So once you've done that restructure, then the next step, which is tip number 6, is to measure your org structure like a pirate. And this is something that I'd heard a few times over the years, and really applied it in ETAP, which is the Pirate Metrics framework. And so to just tell you what that is, the Pirate Metrics framework will get your organization shouting "R." What that means is that it's a funnel, actually. So you measure everything from awareness, so how many people are like aware of your product, all the way down to the number of customers who are coming back to your product. So you have acquisition, activation, and revenue, and then retention and referral. So you measure all of this like a funnel, and you can apply that framework, like measuring your product like a funnel, to on an org level, right? You can split it out on an org level into your tribes or into outcomes that you want, or you can actually apply that framework on a squad level as well. So each squad will own usually respective suites or jobs for customers, or they'll own problems that they're solving for, and all of those have some sort of funnel. And so you can just keeping that Pirate Metrics framework in mind means you're not going to skip. If you've got a clear low-hanging fruit, you're not going to miss it. So that's actually tip number 6, is basically to use that Pirate Metrics framework. And if you apply it from the top of the org all the way down to the bottom of the org, you'll have a very robust set of OKRs that are trickled down properly. And then,
just quickly on the measurement point. Now, do you see those measurements basically all being quantitative numbers that are coming in, so that you can kind of see end to end what's going on, kind of give you more of a 360 view of how things are operating and where to course correct? Or does it also include more qualitative data?
It depends. So if nice commonly used phrase, it depends. If you're using Pirate Metrics at the top of your org, then for sure it's something that you can use as a health check. And you can say, okay, are we getting a healthy number of signups? Are we getting a healthy amount of customers using our product? Are we getting a healthy amount of customers checking out on our product and paying us money? Are we getting enough customers who are telling their friends or giving us a high rating, right? So you're like looking at this funnel end to end, and you've got these health metrics on a high level. But as you go down the org, or as you go into these squads within these tribes, you will see that these high level health checks have been sliced down. So instead of looking at number of signups, you may look at the conversion rate of landing to sign up, right? You might like have that split out to conversion rate. You have someone who's just focusing on the sign up page, or you have like in the checkout page, you have like a squad that focuses on certain add-ons in that page, and they will be only looking at the metrics related to those add-ons. So it's all trickled down, or actually in a way bottom up, but agreed either way between both sides. And that means that everybody is focusing towards the same mission and vision in the end, but within their respective tribe or squad.
Yeah. And a follow-up there, I mean, do you feel like, so I mean, I love kind of the ARG framework. I mean, the pirate framework, let's put it that way. My ARG wasn't very good there. It didn't sound like a pirate, but, it's a little bit of a peeve for me that in many organizations, there's this holy, metric, which is the NPS, and that's what they use. And that's the only metric that they care about, that senior leadership wants. But, it's obviously leaving out so much. And this is what's great about this framework, I think, is that it is more of a holistic view, and you're trying to tap in and take a pulse across all the different stages of your product and your product development. I wonder too, if this data that's coming in, that either is, you can look at it positively or negatively, if it's another way also to locate pain.
100%. It's funny that you mentioned NPS. So Net Promoter Score, it's created by some consultant dude a while back. I can't remember who, but it was then coined as like an industry standard. But ultimately, it's one of the most lagging indicators ever, and it's not. It's not really going to give you any insights, right?
There's also times when there's times when I've seen it used where it just like doesn't make sense. Like no one's going to recommend this system. It's like there's like a disconnect as to like the words and like what the context is.
I can tell you,
it's just silly.
In a B2B product, a lot of the time it's like, would you recommend this to your competitor? Because that's essentially what it is, right? It's like we're giving you this, you're buying this product from us so that you can compete against everyone else in your market. Would you recommend it to someone else in your market? And that's when exactly NPS does not make any sense anymore. And at that point, honestly, even in B2C products, it's such a lagging indicator. It takes so long to derive, even for B2C products. And it's so detached from what's actually happening in the product that it's kind of like a so what moment, right? Like if your NPS goes up, it's really hard to say the NPS went up because of X, Y, or Z. Unless you've even with statistical significance, it's not actually conclusive, is it? So the best way I like to think about it now is that if you have NPS there, it's more like kind of check the box, health check, don't think too deeply into it. Actually, what you should be doing is you should be looking at satisfaction on a reasoning level. So that means that as you're collecting, as you're asking your customers how happy they are, right? Are they having a good time with your product? You can ask them okay, why was it a bad time? Or why was it a good time? And as you collect these reasons categorically or with free text or however you want to do it, you make it thematic, and then that helps you really identify what's working and what's not. And that way it's more, first of all, it's not a lagging indicator anymore because you get information straight away from customers when you ask them. But it puts you in a position where it's not just about recommendation. It's actually about if your product's bringing the customer value, is your product making the customer happy? So it's usually customer satisfaction or you could say questions directly to the customer, like, how much would you pay for this? How much is this worth to you? Questions like that really help too. But yeah, for sure, there's so many different ways to replace NPS with more meaningful measurements. I'm also on the side of maybe not even using it at all and breaking it down into 2 or 3 health metrics otherwise.
The times where I've even seen it being used to stand for usability is just people just feel okay, we'll just take an NPS score on this prototype, and it's we have to there's got to be a little bit more tailoring that happens here. We just can't have to, we don't have to just use the NPS and then that just because it's seen as an industry standard. We can't deviate it from it at all.
A lot of the time you're trying to save time for your customers in some way, shape or form. And so more recently, it's not applicable all the time, but more recently I've been using time to complete over NPS, right? How long is it taking customers to complete in combination with are customers happy with it? And I think if you combine like time taken plus delight, then you end up with closer to a winning product than if you were just measuring like, would you tell your friend about it, right?
Right. I mean, and I think that honestly, I mean, personally speaking, it's like, I think recommendations I think word of mouth is a really important metric. And I think it does tell you something for sure, just in the right context. Right. And, it depends on what you want that measurement to actually say. And if you're using it in the wrong context, then it really becomes just like basically meaningless. So yeah. All right, cool. So how about we maybe just finish off the deck with the final two tips. Yeah.
Sure. So once you're tracking your funnel, you've got your org structured. Everyone in the org knows like why they're doing what they're doing. Mission and vision's clear. Everyone's focused. Then you can start focusing on helping your customer succeed, right? Because you've got the insights, you know exactly what they need to succeed. And one of the common things within that is what is tip number 7 is to help your customers self-serve. Now, as I was saying earlier, like self-service in the B2C world is just implicit. Like you cannot scale a B2C product because there's too many users unless they can self-serve, right? But in the B2B world, there's been a lot of focus on doing things manually for now because we have less customers and we can get away with it. But now more and more, it's about path to profitability is the key phrase that you hear pretty much everywhere right now. And if you want to create a strong path to profitability, you have to make it so that you don't need like manual customer support. You don't need your account managers, or you don't need your like customer success onboarding team to spend hours and hours with the customer to get stuff set up. The customer can actually do a lot of that themselves. So yeah, helping your customers self-service, tip number 7. And what that means from my perspective is making sure that customers can configure their own account. So that's like, from the onboarding perspective, that's kind of ticks that box. Helping them upgrade and pay for add-ons and packages themselves. So they've already started to realize value, but they want to get more value. So letting them upgrade or pay for the next year or add-ons and packages themselves means that we don't need account managers to get their hands too dirty. And then the last one's actually, from a self-serve perspective, self-serve reports, which is one that doesn't get spoken about enough, to be honest. If customers can view reports on how the product's helping their business or helping them, you could say reports or insights, then they're more likely to repeat 1 and 2, right? Configure their account more, use the product more, or upgrade and pay. So it's more like a catalyst for configuration and upgrades. So yeah, that for me, that's what self-service is for customers.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it almost seems like, and tell me if this is not the right way of looking at it, but what you're trying to do is apply certain principles from B2C to B2B, and just basically say that, these design principles, right, the ones that you just listed, can be applicable to B2B as well, or not so much.
100%. Like you've even got, I even see B2B products now where they have carts, like add to cart, I know, man, like back like 20 years ago, I remember the first time I saw it. I think it was like Vistaprint or something, vistaprint.co.uk, if I remember, not sponsored. They had this really good upsell flow on their checkout where you I think I was buying some business cards because I used to like repair computers many years ago. It's like, I'm going to get some business cards to repair these, so that I can tell people I'm repairing computers. And they'll be like, oh, you need business cards. Well, we also do a stapler with your brand on it. Or we have maybe you need a custom made stamp for your business. Stuff like that, right? So they'd upsell all these other things. Oh, do you want a plastic business card instead of a cardboard one? So all of this was applied, and that's actually a B2B product, right? So the first if you look like way back, the first companies to apply this kind of self-serve motion were the printing companies. They were like bringing you could call it like close to prosumer into the world of printing. I just always get reminded about that when I'm like going through this with B2B companies on like activating self-serve motion itself. I think the other thing as well, by the way, with like when we talk about self-serve, what you're really doing is you're catalyzing those pirate metrics. So if you want customers to if customers can configure the account themselves, then great. You're improving your activation, like that part of the funnel. You're improving the conversion from activation to paying. If you can make it so that they can actually upgrade and pay themselves, then there's less handholding needed. You can improve the collection or revenue, and then allowing them to view reports and see the value coming in. That's improving retention. So I think it's worth mentioning that as well. That self-service is really just a way to optimize and catalyze your total funnel or funnels within your product.
Yeah. What I really like about your whole deck, really, but what I see you doing, and I don't know if you would agree with this or not, but is kind of looking a little bit more high level. So you're trying to like say, well, there's not a whole lot of difference between B2B or B2C or marketing or sales or design. It all kind of, if you look at it through a specific lens, these principles, whether independent of industry, independent of whether it's a digital product or a physical product or an omni-channel, that there are these higher level, almost theoretical principles that can apply.
So, Joe, I've got a question for you. From my experience and the kind of industries that I've been in, both being banking and education, we've tried to, do self-serve, and everybody agrees that this is great. When you're talking about your regular retail customers, it's doable. But when you start moving up the ladder and start talking about your more high value customers who are moving large amounts of money in and out, or when you're talking about a student making his decision on what he's going to study for the next 4 years in terms of university degree, those are sort of high stake kind of domains, right? And oftentimes we've had to go back to the drawing board and scrap out the self-serve component, maybe not the full journey, but a piece of it, just because we realize this is something that requires a relationship manager to be side by side with the customer, or a education counselor side by side with that student, just because the circumstances require it. So how do you kind of draw or bridge the gap between achieving self-serve so that you meet those org metrics, and also ensuring that your customers don't feel like they're losing out on the human component because of the stakes are that high?
Yeah, like you mentioned it as well. It's pieces, right? You never build, like, your whole product can't be fully self-serve, because you're always building new parts of your product, and there's always going to be customers who don't understand how to click a button. There's always going to be customers who either don't understand how to click a button or don't want to click a button, and so you can't actually completely remove people from an organization that has a complex product. And I think that's fine, actually. Like, if you have a big enterprise customer who doesn't even want to try the product, they just want you to tick all the boxes with them, then they need a lot of hand-holding when they eventually go to use that product. Right? So they're definitely not going to do, it's definitely not going to be a self-serve perspective. As you said, it's like high ticket. You go to wash, like if you go to a car wash, you know that if you pay for a hand car wash, you believe if you're paying for a hand car wash, you're going to get a better finish than if you go through the automated car wash, right? So it's like you have this low ticket sales that might not like be as thorough when it comes to details, but get the job done for the people who just need a simpler job done. And then for your bigger ticket customers, versus washing a car versus washing a truck, maybe your enterprise customers, you need that handholding. You can't do without it a lot of the time. So I don't think like becoming product led means scrap your marketing led motions, scrap your sales led motions. It actually is more like they need to be married together. You should allow product led motions to invade your sales led motions in a good way, because it should actually help educate customers. It should give customers the opportunity to self-serve certain things and try it themselves and ask for help when they need it. Or you can ask them if they need help, right? But by only being sales-led, then they never have the opportunity. Customers will never really understand the product that they're using, and it won't allow you to scale faster, right? One of the hidden benefits, I would say, of marrying a product-led motion with a sales-led motion in the longer term is that once you've actually onboarded your enterprise customers, if you are product-led and you do have these like self-serve configuration, self-serve onboarding components to your product suite, the enterprise customer will eventually learn how to use most of them themselves. They won't keep asking you to configure for you, which means that you can be a bit more hands-off with those actually quite expensive enterprise customers. That means that your profit margin's actually better on those enterprise customers who have signed longer term deals with you, because you focus on a product-led motion as well. So yeah, that's my answer to it. Do both for sure.
Awesome. Great. I think we've got one more tip to go.
Yes, tip number 8. So, okay, so yeah, you've practiced creating a self-serve product. You've tried different ways to help your customer trial your product and use your product. So what's next? Tip number 8 is to make sure that everyone in your company has real-time funnel events available to them. This one's super important and completely underrated. If you tell your sales team immediately when a customer's checked out, those first few minutes are so crucial, because you've got a massive chance to increase conversion rate. And the only way to do that is to expose your behavioral tracking to your sales team.
Right. Yeah, no, I can definitely see the advantages of, empowering your sales team to immediately know what is happening without having to go and check a dashboard or be informed by a BI team or whoever. But I mean, it kind of reminds me of a topic we discussed on one of the previous podcast episodes. I think this was episode 3, and that was research democratization, and where we talked about anyone in the company could do research, right? And so if you're, for the sake of saving or securing or closing a deal, if a salesperson is able to jump in, he's now perfectly positioned to kind of not just close the deal, but also understand what led to the drop-off in the first place.
100%. 100%. I think there's 2 parts to this. There's like, people are scared of democratizing data because they believe that people will misuse it. I've actually never really seen that happen. I've seen people say, yeah, the data says X, Y, Z, but I've also then immediately seen product managers or analysts jump in and say, yeah, but actually this is like number 4 on the list, right? So it's never been misused. It's only created dialogue and helped people align and agree. And creating agreement is way more powerful than like not discussing it. And so I think data democratization is super important. I don't think it's as hard as it used to be. I think you can use Mixpanel, you can use Metabase. You've got tools like Looker, which allow you to combine transactional and behavioral data in one place. And data cleanliness is a whole other topic. Of course, you need to care about that, but that's a whole other world, whole other topic that you need to keep an eye on. But I think if you do have someone looking after the cleanliness of your tracking, and you're able to empower your product teams with self-serve, to become data informed in a self-serve way, then you're in a very strong position.
No, I think it all boils down to what we mean by democratization. So yeah, I mean, I think if what we mean by it is dissemination, if we want to take whatever data we collect, whether it's quantitative, whether it's data science type stuff, analytics, or interviews, to across the entire life cycle, end to end, then yeah, I think it's always for the better. Like to your point, Joe, yeah, I haven't really seen it be misused or interpreted all that much. I think it just helps to make people more informed, get that narrative, set this, kind of get the story straight, so to speak, and get everybody on the same page and really align people. I think when it comes to some of the points you're talking about, like, to data cleanliness, designing experiments, designing studies, these kinds of things, then democratization gets a little bit, I think we should be a little bit more skeptical about disseminating, allowing people to collect it themselves. But yeah, it's interesting. I think your tip 8, it reminds me, I see a parallel actually to UX research where, there are times when you want to highlight, for example, for your stakeholders. So you go out, you do all these interviews, for example, let's just say it's a qualitative study, but you want to snip out a little piece of an interview and then show people a user actually talking, or maybe it's like you're taking a video of someone going through the UI of a prototype and they're making a mistake. So you record that, you snip it out, and you show people, and that becomes so much more powerful than just say like a deck. It's something that's 100%. Really more something more tangible, and it really impacts stakeholders. And it goes back to I think you're one of the most important tips that you have, which is agreeing, having insights help
people agree.
People agree. Everyone get on the same page, which is like one of the most powerful like aspects of the data, I think. So,
100%. Yeah, like if you're willing to align on finding pain points, align on discovery with different stakeholders within the org, or different roles or specializations within the org, you're measuring experiments, you're actually finding trends, then those trends will lead to insights. And you'll be you'll be positioned in a much better place to agree on changes faster. Yeah. And that's what a lot of the time. It's how fast can you agree to fail or agree to succeed? How fast can you all confidently agree to disagree? And it allows you to experiment faster, and you will learn a lot more from experimentation than you would from creating a 6-month McKinsey, 6-month slide deck. What did I say? No, I shouldn't have said that. But a 6-month slide deck about what you should be doing. Instead, just experiment fast and fail fast, or succeed fast. Learn fast. Great. Most importantly.
Great. Cool. All right. So maybe a few, if it's okay, a few more general questions to close off. I think I have maybe one or two for Joe. In particular, you're talking about design, product led, and we've also heard, in the industry, on LinkedIn, on research reports, it sometimes be referred to design led. Also, I've heard, concepts or kind of buzzwords like, customer centricity, making your organization more customer oriented. Do you really see a major differences between how people are describing? It seems like, again, there's a family resemblance between, say, product led. I think speaking of McKinsey, I think they came out with a report about ways to structure organizations to make it design led. Do you see any distinctions there, or do you really hold strong to wanting to view it and frame things from product point of view?
So I see, when I think of product led, I think of 3 gears. and this isn't in any of my decks. This is just something that I've been like thinking about recently. The first gear is the perception of the product, and that you'll always have marketing, you'll always have sales and products involved there partially as well, which is, what your customers think they'll get, what your customers say what you say your customers will get, and what your customers actually get at the end of the day, right? That's your sort of first gear, your perception. Then your second gear in your cycle of development or cycle of your life cycle of your product, I should say, is your creation gear, which is your product team. Could be your product designers, could be your product managers, could be product ops, whoever it is, who are focusing on what problems should be solved for customers. But then within that, and the bit that gets missed quite often within that creation piece is the UX piece, which is how you can save your customers pain in the most delightful way possible. That's the simplest way I can put it, right? How do you save your customers from pain in the most delightful way possible? And that's the missing user experience piece, which I see in many, many orgs. So I can understand why someone would call it design-led, because when you do a product-led motion, you are looking at those pain points. And of course, you want to delight customers, right? You want to delight those users. Then the last part of the creation piece is actually involving engineering more. I mentioned at the beginning that I've seen orgs where they've completely segregated engineering from product, which is absolutely nuts. I've seen it happen so many times though. Or they've put design in a room to create a design system separated away from product and engineering, which ends up being a very long process and slowing down experimentation. And so all of this happens if you don't want it to happen inside it. So part of gear 2 is that creation piece where engineering are now more involved, but engineering are getting involved in the how of solving customer problems. So you get your product managers to workshop with your engineers on how to solve for the highest prioritized problems. And in fact, if you get your engineers to do that cost impact map with you, they might say, well, actually, there's a few quick wins here that you missed. And if that gets skipped, then you never find out about those quick wins. So that's the second gear, creation. And then the third gear, which doesn't get spoke about enough, to be honest, it ends up getting bucketed with ops or gets bucketed with sales, is your support gear. And your support gear, you have first line, second line, third line. And I'm not talking about IT support, first, second, third line, or different ways that other people have structured it. I'm talking about the real first line, second line, and third line, which is your customer success, customer support. It's your first line agents, your customer support agents who they get customers complaining about something very reactively. If they can't solve it, the account manager hears about it. That's your second line support. An account manager, you think of it in terms of cost. Customer support's usually lowest cost per person, let's say. Second line, account managers are very expensive to be dealing with this all day long, right? And then when it gets worse, your third line support is actually your engineers a lot of the time. Your engineers have to jump in reactively to these problems. So that's the third gear as well. So with a product-led org, it allows you to identify all these pain points across these 3 gears and essentially oil them up and make your org run more successfully. It's kind of a theory I'm just working on at the moment, but it's a way I was thinking of visualizing these this product lifecycle.
It's a very interesting way, I think, and unique way of approaching it. To me, it reminds me, it has a flavor of kind of an entrepreneurial spirit, an entrepreneurial mindset that is thinking very much high level as what's the big organizing vision, and then have once you get that straight, then all of the pieces kind of make sense in terms of how they work together.
The reason why I started thinking of it this way recently was what I noticed is that in product teams, when new features or new suites are released, we tend to, as product managers, nearly all product managers I know, tend to forget about that third gear and the first gear. They're just thinking about gear 2, the creation piece. And so they're not thinking about perception, how are we going to market it? How are sales going to be empowered to be able to handle this product? And they're not thinking about gear 3. Is it going to incur lots of technical questions? Have we made it self-serve enough? our account managers up to speed? Is there something they should be telling us that they're not? Have we made them our spies, right? Like account managers are some of your best spies, customer support as well. I think the more product managers or product people are thinking about gear 1 and gear 3, so perception and support as well as creation, the better your products will be in the end.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it's a very holistic way of approaching it. And yeah, I think that it very much is I'd say also a user experience. It takes into account the user experience, which is not something that many traditional or legacy organizations or processes does a very good job with, which I agree with you about that. Mustafa, is there anything else that I want to be respectful of time now? I know we're going almost close to 2 hours. So is there anything else that you have for Joe before we sign off?
No, I think we've pretty much covered everything. Like I wrote down a bunch of questions and, thank you, Joe. You've answered most of them through the discussion itself. But yeah, I think this was, super, super insightful. I thought I knew quite a bit about product, and then clearly, there's still a lot more to learn. And thank you for filling in those gaps. I think this was awesome to really get to understand how you've conceptualized this overarching, I guess, your own little framework of what it means to be product led, and also how being design led, how you can't be product led without being design led. Right. I think that's my takeaway from this. But yeah, I think we're good. All good.
We'll just push it together. It's just push it together, product design led, and then we'll cover all our bases.
That's a wrap for this episode of YouX. If you want to stay up to date with Chris and Mustafa's latest episodes, be sure to subscribe to the show and leave them a review on your favorite podcast platform. It helps other listeners find the podcasts and join in on the conversation. And don't forget to check the line notes to follow the podcast on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn for behind-the-scenes content, updates, access to comment boards, and sneak peeks of upcoming episodes. Thanks for listening to YouX, and we'll see you next time for some more insights into the ever-evolving world of user experience.